welcome to the Christ Pearls channel. This is Jessica, and in this video I want to talk to you about something that I've thought a little bit about only because of these eclipses that we've had recently. So here in America, we had a few eclipses. There were two that were total solar eclipses. One was in 2017, and it stretched from the Pacific coast down south through the East Coast, and it went right over the heartland of America, right over where there's a lot of church history, right over where like the New Jerusalem and Adam Diamond are prophesied to be and to have been. And then in just this year, April of 2024, the next solar eclipse that was a total solar eclipse went right over church history sites like Palmyra, the Hill Cumorah, Kirtland, and then again right over where this like New Jerusalem area is supposed to be. And in 2023, we had an eclipse that went through Utah. This was what they called the Ring of Fire. So it's not a total blackout of the sun, but it's where the moon passes over and then there's just like a little ring. And when you think of a ring, you can think eternity, you can think of like a wedding ring, like in the Hebrew wedding tradition, the bride and the bridegroom. So there's just a lot of things that I've thought about with regard to these eclipses. I remember back in, I think it was 2020, it was when the pandemic was happening, and a lot of people were kind of freaking out, like, what is going on in the world? Things are crazy. And some people were talking about these eclipses, and it did perk up my ears a little bit and kind of make me want to return to just studying the second coming and the signs of the times. And I had started a little private study group with a few friends. I still have this little kind of niche private study group, and I keep it really private and small because I just don't like getting off topic and into the weeds with people and just their just really out there off topic ideas. And I try to keep it really focused because it's just, there's other groups, for other things, but I just wanted to have kind of like a private, smaller, more intimate discussion that could kind of stay a little focused. And so I've, over the years, kind of collected lots of commentary and things. And at some point, I would like to do some videos, maybe just showing you guys some of those posts from my little study group. I'm not going to invite everyone to the study group because it's kind of just for me and a small group of friends and acquaintances that I've gotten to know through other friends who've, we've kind of opened up the group a little bit, but I would like to bring that to more people and share some of those things that I've just sort of archived in the group. And one of those topics that we've talked a little bit about is these eclipses. And I remember back in 2020, I kind of asked around in just other LDS circles, other LDS groups, if, people were talking about these eclipses because they go over church history sites and they felt like there was some beautiful symbolism happening there. Some people felt like this was a sign of like the second coming, although it's not really listed as one of the signs of the times specifically, but I can see why people have felt this way. And, I just have kind of pondered on that. But then I noticed that there was these other eclipses that were identical. So these two that go over like an X, which creates the Tav symbol. So for Hebrew, like the Aleph is like all three of these marks over America form the Aleph, which is like the first or A. And then the Tav is like the last, or like Z in our alphabet, basically. And so it presents these ideas, surely from just the symbolism. And they were about 7 years apart, 7 solar years. Exactly 7 solar years. And on the Gregorian calendar, it'd be like just shy of 7 years. Some people were talking about how it was like 666 on the Gregorian, but if you're looking at solar years, this was 7 solar years apart. And these other eclipses that cross over the same pattern, the same exact distance apart, cross over the Red Sea. And I mean, there's tons of history here. I mean, all of ancient Israel's history is in this whole area in the Middle East. So for me, I was just looking at these like, well, if these over here in America mean something, then surely these ones in the Middle East mean something. And back when I'd kind of asked around, nobody really thought about it, had anything to say about it. Since then, I've seen people kind of coming around and looking at these two and coming up with all kinds of symbolic ideas. And I've made note of those things over the years. So I have like all kinds of notes. These are all things that I've posted in my group. And I've been just kind of collecting them or archiving them here in this little Word doc too. And some of those things that I've noted were things that I started off. So like back when I was asking about this, it was because I had seen it on a website by an evangelical who had made note of it. And he had noted the ones in America too, but didn't really seem to understand them, obviously because he doesn't have any association with our church's history. So that was understandable that he didn't really seem to know exactly what could be so special about those other than that they looked like these other ones in the Middle East. And he had done this whole blog post about it. His name is Dean Coombs. He posted this back in 2017. So, I mean, this was the time of that first eclipse. And remember, there was like this sign of the woman in the sky back then too, which is really similar to the description in the book of Revelation, chapter 12. So there was like, like the moon was at her feet and the crown of 12 stars was on her head. So if you were looking in the heavens, this had occurred in 2017 at the same time that these eclipses started. And there was a lot of buzz for people who pay attention to these things. And I had kind of gotten wind of some of these ideas and like heard the buzz. And I thought, yeah, that is really interesting. And it does seem like maybe the Lord is saying something. And I'm not sure, like for sure, if it has something to do with the second coming, which is one interpretation. But it did seem like messages that help us remember what the Lord has done for us, remembering covenant Israel. And that was kind of where my mind went. So in this blog post, Dean Coombs notes these eclipses in the Middle East. He notes what's happening in the sky, in the stars above during this time. So the total eclipse in August 2nd, 2027 is going to have daylight blocked out for easy viewing. He says he notices that the star Regulus, or the little king, is next to the king planet Jupiter in the constellation of Leo the lion, the king of beasts, and that the lion of the tribe of Judah takes his stand against the god of Ishmael, whose mother Hagar was an Egyptian, and his wife. Now, obviously, this story kind of brings to mind ideas for me about ancient Israel's history, and it did for this blogger too. He notes just some of this symbolism. It's very ancient. He says, located in Thebes, Egypt, where the solar eclipses will pass over, note the scarab pushing the sun. In the Dendera zodiac of Egypt, it's the scarab instead of the constellation of the crab. Hence, an eclipse at this position among the stars over Thebes would have been truly ominous back then, and it's a warning to the fallen angels today. 7 years after the 2027 solar eclipse on the Lunar New Year of 2034, and less than 3 hours before the solar spring equinox, another total solar eclipse passes over Egypt and Medina. This one in 2034 occurs exactly 71 jubilees from the Exodus in 1446 BC. To be specific, 71 jubilees occurred to the very day when another similar total solar eclipse occurred that crossed over the source of the Nile River. And he references another blog post for that story. There's exactly 7 eclipse years, draconic years, between the eclipse of 2027 and 2034, a time frame fundamental to the Bible and the book of Revelation. So he's talking about the symbolism of the number 7. And he's saying how this suggests a new beginning, like a completion of something, just from the number 7. But then another new beginning is referenced here as he lists out just possible calendars aligning. Now, I'm going to tell you that I did try to independently verify this theory that he has just about these calendars aligning. He lists out several. So he says, like, a few hours before the religious Jewish Lunar New Year instituted by Moses in Egypt, exactly 49 times 71 years earlier, the eclipse passed over Egypt. So he's noting that. And then he's saying this occurs like a few hours before the Muslim New Year. And he says it'll be a few hours before the spring equinox or the solar New Year. So we got Lunar New Year, Solar New Year, Muslim New Year. I think just these 3 alone speak volumes, especially considering we're talking about the ancient Middle East. And he says this occurs on the 10th day of the first and second months of the year on the 360 calendar of the prophet. So he has this like 360-day calendar, which is kind of like the whole point of his blog, and it's based on a theory. And so that's kind of like what he's referencing there. And this is the stuff that I can't really independently verify, but he made some interesting just kind of remarks based on this. And he's saying, because they used to have a 360-day calendar in like ancient Israel. So that's where this idea is coming from. And he's noting that it looks like God is marking his millennial territory, like the land that he gave to Abraham, just from the way that these eclipses are dividing the land. And then he notes all these other different kind of like history. He notes the Chinese New Year. It's going to start in January and between January and February. Just lots of different calendars aligning. And I really wasn't able to independently verify all of these. A couple of these things were true, and then the rest of them was kind of like, well, this is a theory. And I just thought that was kind of interesting because, again, it's like we have these eclipses that are passing over America in a promised land, and then in ancient Israel in a promised land. And I had made this little diagram just kind of showing the number of days between the eclipses. And I saw that they were divided into 5 periods. And for me, this kind of made me think of the 5 covenants we make in the temple. So when we go to the temple, we covenant to be obedient. So there's obedience, sacrifice, the law of the gospel, which is like the central covenant. And then there's the law of chastity and the law of consecration. And consecration is something that will be like a millennial law. And we do live it today in the form of consecrating our time and talents, consecrating and offering through tithes and fast offerings. So these are just things that I guess the number 5 was making me think about. And of course, they're 7 years apart. And these are the 2 that form the Tav that I had just kind of spaced out there. And when I look at them in comparison to these ones that form the Tav over the Red Sea, I can see that there is 7 years here from August 21st, 2017 to April 8th, 2024, when these 2 total solar eclipses happen. And the midpoint would have been December 14th, 2020. And there was actually a Christmas star, just like, it was like a week after that, where it was like a planetary conjunction of, I believe it was Saturn and Jupiter. And there's just all kinds of symbolism there too, just biblical symbolism with those planets, like Christ and the church. And and it forms like this really bright looking star in the sky, and it was right at Christmas time. So it was just kind of interesting, some of these things that people had noted, and I had made just bunches of notes about these things, especially when I would see people conversating about it, posting about it. I would also add notes to this. I did try to kind of like AI check this theory by Dean Coombs about the calendars. And AI basically said, this needs careful examination because some of this makes sense and some of it doesn't quite make sense. It's based on a theory that this person is coming up with. And it wasn't really able to verify all 9 of those points. So, but I do believe that just the few that it was able to verify was interesting. So the AI noted like the Jewish Lunar New Year, this claim needs careful examination. The Jewish calendar is lunisolar, and the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, typically occurs in the fall around September or October, but the first month, Nisan, in the religious calendar begins in the spring. So it's just talking about how they have like 2 New Years. One is for the religious calendar and one is like just the regular calendar. Excuse me, I'm coughing. And then it kind of gave me a little bit of information about the Muslim New Year. And it did confirm that this calendar is also lunar and that it can vary. And the alignment mentioned is theoretically possible, but exact synchronization with the Jewish New Year and the historical celebration of Moses' victory would need further research. So based on Dean Coombs' research, he's coming up with these theories, okay? And the AI doesn't really have, like, I didn't put in all of Dean Coombs' research. I don't even have access to that. So he does blog about it, though. Anyway, just all of these things were very interesting, and I do believe that if you're looking at it from that perspective that he noted, then it makes sense that it sort of suggests like a new beginning. And so I had kind of made a note about that. I like the idea of 4 because there's 4 watches of the night, and what this references is the 4 Roman watches. So in Jesus's day, the night was divided into these like 4 periods of the night where there would be like a guard on duty, and like everything kind of like all of their time sort of went off of this idea. So from dawn would begin at 6 a.m. and it would go till sundown at 6 p.m. So that's why you'll see like the Jewish Sabbath starts at sundown. And so because the day is from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., the night is from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and that nighttime is divided into 4 watches. So there's the evening watch from sundown to 9 p.m., and then the midnight watch from 9 p.m. to midnight. And then the cock crow watch, which is midnight to 3 a.m., and then the dawn watch, which is 3 a.m. to dawn. And this all comes from in Mark chapter 13 when there's like this idea of staying awake because you don't know when the master of the house is coming, even midnight, cockcrow, or dawn. And then also if you look at the idea of the 4th watch God, which you can get in Matthew, and I cannot remember the chapter off the top of my head, but the story of when the disciples are on the Sea of Galilee and they're in peril, they're rowing and rowing. The Savior's up on the mountain, which is having this temple experience, and he looks down and he sees them on the water, and he could rescue them when they're like halfway through this difficult night rowing, but he doesn't. He actually lets them keep rowing, and when he comes to rescue them, it's in the 4th watch. And so there's a principle there that the Lord will allow us to have some travail, some struggle, but he will bring relief. And he's a 4th watch God. And you can kind of Google that. There's an LDS Living article. I think it's called 4th Watch God, but it's by S. Michael Wilcox. And he is a really great instructor. He's written lots of books. He's been part of the church education system for years. I think he's retired now, but he's written and authored many, many books that I love, and I'll probably feature some of his work on my channel because I just love a lot of his work, and that's one of those things that he taught really well. So anyway, the number 4 makes me think about this fourth watch concept quite a bit, and the idea of being a fourth watch god. And anyway, so I just wanted to show that there is like a few paths that archaeologists think may have been the path of Moses through ancient Israel when the children of Israel are escaping Egypt. And they do cross over the Red Sea. And one of the points where they think they may have crossed is in this Gulf of Aqaba. And I'm aware of some old stories about this Gulf of Aqaba. There is a claim that I remember seeing a long time ago about them finding what they think is like a Roman chariot wheel and bones in the Gulf of Aqaba, or just like remnants of what they think was bones. But it's kind of one of those things where I think in like mainstream Christianity, people get really excited about this. They talk about it a lot. There's been people who've done stories on this. I think CBN did one a long time ago, but this really is just kind of a side note. But the reason that I bring it up is because this is one of the places where they think that the children of Israel may have crossed, is this Gulf of Aqaba. And there is like several stories. Like you could look on YouTube for some of these, but if you just put in Gulf of Aqaba and chariot wheel Exodus, a Google search will pull up this, which says there's no clear archaeological evidence that supports the story of Exodus other than the biblical account. But some people claim to have found coral-encrusted chariot wheels on the bottom of the Red Sea. Others claim to have found wreckage that could be the outer rim of a wheel. However, a coral reef ecologist says that the evidence they've seen doesn't support the claims. Wood breaks down quickly, but corals keep growing, so they don't stay the same shape for 3,500 years. So whether this is true or not true is kind of irrelevant. The point is, this is one of the locations that they think they may have went. And because of that, people search this area for evidence. And if you look at the map of the eclipses that go in 2027 and 2034, they do go over the Red Sea. And while we're not sure exactly where Moses crossed the Red Sea, we do know that it was the Red Sea. And the reason that I feel like this is important is because we have two promised lands. We've got the United States of America as the promised land, where the stick of Joseph, the remnants of Joseph in Egypt, this land is for Joseph. And then we have this old ancient Israel land for the house of Israel. It was divided among the house of Israel, all 12 tribes. And in the last days, the gospel will go forward to the rest of the house of Israel from Joseph's line through Ephraim and Manasseh. And this is the story of the house of Israel, the gathering, the scattering, and then the gathering that I'm seeing here in these eclipses. And there's all these other things people have noted. So I'll just kind of scroll through and show you a few of those things. I'm sure you're familiar with this, but people have noted like just the locations, the hemispheres, the 7 years apart, the crisscrossing, the Tav symbol, the Aleph symbol. They've noted like the time, the numbers, the biblical numbers, what those things mean. I have noted those things. I've made tons and tons of notes. I've shared those with other people. This has all gotten around, I think, in small circles of people who like to talk about the second coming or signs of the times. Christians and outside the church talk about these things. They really get excited about them. And I don't know, I've thought it's interesting, and I've taken an interest in it as well. And I've thought about it a little bit, but more in terms of symbolism. So for me, the symbolism that's coming across is this idea of the first is last and the last is first. So, where the original house of Israel received the gospel and had the gospel first, in the last days, this remnant of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh, they're going to bring the gospel to the original house of Israel. So all of those tribes that were scattered and mingled with the Gentile nations, they are the ones who bring the gospel to the original house of Israel in the end time. And so it kind of makes me think about that, because I don't know, that's what I think about when I think about these two covenant promised lands. And then, of course, that leads me to another thought, which is the Exodus, because the Red Sea obviously invokes thoughts of the Exodus. And there was another Exodus that took place that led to a promised land. And in Revelation chapter 12, we hear this story about the wilderness. So if I pull up Revelation chapter 12, I'm going to look at the Joseph Smith translation for Revelation chapter 12, because this is one chapter that got completely changed. I mean, like, the order of everything is changed. It's just totally different than how it is in the New Testament in the KJV. So I want to look at this Joseph Smith translation of Revelation chapter 12. It says, "And there appeared a great sign in heaven, in the likeness of things on the earth, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And the woman, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and his throne. And there appeared another sign in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was delivered, ready to devour her child after it was born. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 years. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought against Michael. And the dragon prevailed not against Michael, neither the child nor the woman, which was the church of God." So this is that bride and bridegroom motif again. We've got Hebrew wedding here. "Who had been delivered of her pains and brought forth her kingdom of our God and his Christ." So we're talking about Zion. And the woman, the church, bringing forth Zion. "Neither was there place found in heaven for the great dragon, who was cast out, that old serpent called the devil, and also called Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength, and this kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which has accused them before our God day and night. For they have overcome him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony. For they loved not their own lives, but kept the testimony even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and ye that dwell in them. And after these things I heard another voice saying, Woe to the inhabitants of the earth, yea, and they who dwell upon the islands of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. For the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth. He persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. Therefore to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might flee into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time, from the face of the serpent. And the serpent casteth out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helpeth the woman, and the earth openeth her mouth, and swalloweth up the flood, which the dragon casteth out of his mouth. Therefore the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now there is a ton of symbolism in here, and I'm not going to do this video about the book of Revelation, but I just want you to have those verses in your mind and just think about this entire plan, how the Lord, he has the church, the bride. He's trying to bring forth the child, Zion, the kingdom of God, the political and ecclesiastical kingdom. The Lord establishes the covenant again with Joseph Smith at the beginning of the restoration. There's a lot of things that happen there. I mean, it talks about the stars that were cast down. It talks about just so much symbolism here that it could take hours and hours and hours, maybe weeks and days of just trying to understand it all and study it all. But the reason I bring this up is because there was that sign of the woman in the sky that year that the eclipse started. And so for me, it called to mind this entire chapter. And I think that this story of the Lord trying to bring forth Zion is what it made me think about. Now, there's times in history where Israel had apostatized and then a new covenant had to be restored again. One of those times was in the days of Moses, and he had to, free the children of Israel from bondage and then bring them over the Red Sea into a wilderness, kind of like what it's talking about in Revelation chapter 12. And they wandered in the desert for 40 years, and then they created Zion. And for a time, Zion flourished. And a similar story happens in early church history after the new covenant is established with Joseph Smith. He's trying to restore all these old covenants, everything from dispensations past. And he's trying to establish Zion in America, in a new promised land, a land for the stick of Joseph. And here the saints are first trying to establish a little Zion community in Kirtland, and then they're forced out of there, and then they go to Jackson County, Missouri, and there was horrible drama there, and they were forced out of there, and then they go to Nauvoo, and they were finally able to have a little bit of peace in Nauvoo for a couple of short years, just a few short years, and then they built a temple, and at the time that the temple was trying to be finished being built, they were under a lot of pressure. Joseph Smith was martyred with his brother Hiram, and then Brigham Young, he and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, there's like 8 of them that had apostatized in the days of Joseph Smith, and 4 of them returned. So you see that parallel with the 1/3 of the stars falling in the book of Revelation chapter 12, and that did symbolically happen in the church in the early days. And then after Joseph died, there's all this drama, and some people don't want to go with Brigham Young. And even though the keys of the kingdom were given to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and together, collectively, they held the keys. And so just all of this was going on. And what ends up happening is Brigham Young ends up having to lead another exodus out of Nauvoo, where they have their beautiful temple, which ultimately gets destroyed, and he has to lead them into a wilderness far away in the west. Now, this is Utah, and there was this ring of fire eclipse over Utah, and it goes right over the Manti Temple, and that's actually where I got to see the ring of fire. I was at the Manti Temple when that happened. It was really beautiful. It was a really perfect day for it too. And I brought my kids and my husband, and we went and we saw this beautiful ring of fire. And I thought about that. I thought about the pioneers. I thought about this beautiful pioneer temple. I thought about just this exodus from Nauvoo to Utah. And then the church gets established in Utah on the tops of the mountains, and the saints have a little bit of rest and reprieve from the world for a short time. And this oppressive government that keeps trying to hinder them in their ability to bring forth Zion. And in Utah, they're able to establish Zion for a short time, and eventually the world catches up. And here we are today. The church is still here. The word of the Lord is still going forth out of the mountain of the Lord's house in Salt Lake City, in Zion, in Utah. And, we're trying to gather scattered Israel. And the story of the gathering of Israel is commenced. It's happening. And so when I see these 2 eclipses, this is what is coming to my mind. And I want to show just a couple of things really quickly. So if you go to chapter 42, the gathering of the house of Israel, this is in it's in your gospel library app, and if you can look it up, but it just gives you kind of like a bullet list of the gathering. This is in like the Old Testament manual. And anyway, what I wanted to show is just how it notes in here that the Israelites are to be gathered spiritually first and then physically. They're gathered spiritually as they join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and make and keep sacred covenants. And this spiritual gathering began during the time of the prophet Joseph Smith, and it continues today all over the world. Converts to the church are Israelites, either by blood or adoption. They belong to the family of Abraham and Jacob. And Joseph Fielding Smith, he said, there are many nations represented in the church. They've come because the Spirit of the Lord rested upon them. Receiving the spirit of gathering, they left everything for the sake of the gospel. And the physical gathering of Israel means that the covenant people will be gathered home to the lands of their inheritance and shall be established in all their lands of promise. And there are many lands of promise, okay? Even the isles of the sea, everywhere there is a promised land for God's children. Now the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh will be gathered in the Americas. The tribes of Judah will return to the city of Jerusalem and the area surrounding it. The 10 lost tribes will receive from the tribe of Ephraim their promised blessings. So it goes on to give us a little church history. It says when the church was first established, the saints were instructed to gather in Ohio, then Missouri, then Salt Lake Valley. Today, however, modern prophets have taught that the church members are to build up the kingdom of God in their own lands. Elder Russell M. Nelson said, the choice to come unto Christ is not a matter of physical location, it's a matter of individual commitment. People can be brought to the knowledge of the Lord without leaving their homelands. So this is like a concept. There's actually an article that covers all of this about Israel and how right now we're doing a spiritual gathering. That's what we're doing. And people are physically gathering to whatever land they're in. So we have wards and stakes. The stakes of Zion are being extended over the earth. And this is part of the concept of gathering at this point in time. So the physical gathering of Israel will not be complete until the second coming of the Savior and into the millennium. So right now, we're spiritually gathering into the covenant, and we're physically gathering to our homelands. And in the millennium, the gathering will be complete. That's like at the end of the millennium, okay, when the work is finished. So this makes me think of this Exodus Repeated article. It was originally part of a church education system, Fireside, that was given at BYU on September 7th, 1997. And then the church reprinted this in April 2002 in the church magazines. And they obviously thought this was an important talk. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if you want to look at this, I highly recommend it. It's a very, very interesting article. I'm going to read some highlights from it, though. So there's the Josephs. And in this article, President Nelson, who was Elder Nelson at the time, he likens Joseph in Egypt to Joseph Smith. So we're going to read a little bit about that. So he talks the story about just Joseph in Egypt. And he says a name common to both was Joseph who was sold into Egypt, and the prophet Joseph Smith. Few men in the Old Testament are of greater importance to Latter-day Saints than is Joseph of Egypt. Many of us claim lineage from him through his sons Ephraim and Manasseh. The Book of Mormon reveals a part of the remnant of the coat of Joseph was preserved and had not decayed. Even as this remnant of garment hath been preserved, so shall a remnant of the seed be preserved by the hand of God and taken unto himself. So many exoduses have occurred on the Promised Land in America. We have Lehi, who led his people out, and he brings them to the American continent. Now, there's, of course, discrepancy. There's like the different theories of where they landed. Mesoamerica was at the heartland of America, but it was the American continent, and all of North and South America is this promised land for Joseph. And we had an exodus out of ancient Israel to this promised land, this American continent, with Lehi and his descendants. And they established a new covenant and a new Zion here in the American continent. So there was one exodus. And so we have like ancient Israel with Moses, and then we have Lehi making an exodus to America. And you'll find throughout Israel's history, there's been lots of exoduses. You can go through the scriptures and start finding several. I mean, even in the days of war among the Nephites and Lamanites, Hagoth made an exodus, and he left his people. And there's been prophets who've testified that Hagoth's people went to the Isles of the Sea, and so there's just different exoduses that you'll see in scripture throughout time. And now where exactly Hagoth went is, I don't want to get into that or know for sure, but there have been commentary about that. The fact is, in the Book of Mormon, it does talk about him making an exodus, leaving, because they didn't want to participate in the wars. And so there's just different exoduses over time, and I don't even know if we know all of them. I don't know if all of them are recorded in the books of scripture that we have available to us, but the Lord is always preserving Israel. And then you look at like the allegory of the olive trees is all about this. It talks about all these different exoduses that are made over time, and this is how the Lord preserves his covenant people. He's protecting them. He's keeping the promises made to the fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that their seed would be preserved. And every time that there's apostasy and destruction, the Lord does save the most righteous among them. And he preserves them and brings them out of wherever the conflict is. And he brings them to a place of safety and refuge. And he does this through all dispensations. And he does it in the last dispensation. This dispensation of the fullness of times, a great exodus occurred from Nauvoo to Utah. And because of that exodus, a remnant was preserved even when all the powers of the evil world were working against the saints. And so we see the Lord remembering his covenant people. And so when I look at these, I'm thinking covenant promises, covenant Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Lord preserving the seeds, the allegory of the olive tree. That's what I'm thinking about and what I feel like it's reminding me of. And in this Exodus Repeated article, not only does President Nelson compare Joseph in Egypt to Joseph Smith, but he also compares Brigham Young to Moses. And he talks about how there was this exodus. So I want to read this section. So Moses and Brigham Young had much in common. They were astute followers before they became great leaders. Moses had been prepared in the courts of Egypt and had gained much experience in military and other responsibilities. Brigham Young was likewise prepared for his leadership role. In the March of Zion's camp, he had observed the leadership of the prophet Joseph Smith under difficult conditions. Brigham Young aided in the removal of the prophet Joseph Smith from Kirtland. He also directed the move of the persecuted saints from Missouri to Nauvoo. For both the Israelites, so this is interesting too, because Missouri to Nauvoo, that was another exodus, right? From Kirtland to Missouri, then Missouri to Nauvoo, then Nauvoo to Salt Lake, and far away in the west is where they were safe. For both the Israelites and the saints, civil and ecclesiastical law were unified under one head. Moses bore that responsibility for his people. Brigham Young, the modern Moses, led the Latter-day Saints movement west with the Lord's blessing. Moses and Brigham Young followed parallel patterns of governance. Brigham Young organized the large group of men, women, and children for an orderly migration to the west. We lament that leaders of both groups had to endure dissensions from their close associates. On occasion, Moses encountered opposition from his beloved Aaron and Miriam. Latter-day leaders also suffered contention among their trusted associates. Nevertheless, the same unified pattern of government will come again when the Lord shall be king over all the earth and govern from Zion and Jerusalem. The journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai took about 3 months. The journey from winter quarters to the valley of the Great Salt Lake also took about 3 months, 111 days to be exact. The destination for each group was described by the Lord as a land flowing with milk and honey. And remember, if you've watched my videos, the playlist that I have for the Hebrew wedding motif, milk and honey should make you think of promised land, and you should be thinking woman, the church, the bride, for the bridegroom. The pioneers turned their wilderness into a fruitful field. So remember, land means bringing forth. The men till the earth, and they bring forth fruit for their women and children. And the women bring forth fruit of the womb. And together as mothers and fathers, we bring forth Zion. So men and women working together is what creates the church, the woman, the bride, for the bridegroom, who brings forth in this child Zion, daughter Zion, the fruit of the Lord. So I don't know, this is all the stuff that's coming to my mind with these ideas. And anyway, the pioneers turned their wilderness into a fruitful field and made the desert blossom as a rose, precisely as prophesied by Isaiah centuries before. Now, this prophecy has multiple fulfillments, but one of those is this situation that they're talking about in Utah. Now, he goes on and talks about how both groups of these two exoduses, the one in ancient Israel under Moses and then the one in modern Israel under Brigham Young, they both shared miracles. And he goes through and he lists several miracles. So he says that he also notes how these miracles are memorialized. So he says the celebration of the Passover relates to the travels of ancient Israelites, and each July we repeat legendary stories of our pioneers. So we have like the Pioneer Trek, which is a reenactment of the trek from Nauvoo to Salt Lake. And so we also commemorate our modern Exodus. And ancient Israelites, they left Egypt via the parted waters of the Red Sea, as by dry land. The pioneers left the United States crossing the wide waters of the Mississippi River, frozen to become a highway of ice. The book of Exodus reports that quail were miraculously provided to feed the hungry people of ancient Israel. The pioneers had an equivalent experience. After the last of them had been driven out of Nauvoo, many were sick and some had died. Their provisions were meager. On the river bottoms near Montrose, Iowa, on October 9th, 1846, many quail miraculously flew into the camp. The quail were cooked and fed to some 640 destitute people. It was also miraculous that a permanent settlement survived in the valley of the Great Salt Lake. Seagulls that saved the crops were part of that miracle. God preserved ancient Israel from plagues sent upon Egypt. Similarly, God preserved the saints from the plague of the United States Civil War, which caused more American deaths than any other war. So because the saints were forced to flee west, they were preserved from the sufferings of the Civil War that commenced just as Joseph Smith had prophesied it would. So he goes on and compares the spiritual strength of the ancient Israelites with the spiritual strength of the early pioneers. And he lists all sorts of examples. And he, continues to note how the ancient Israelites gratefully celebrated their exodus from Egypt, just like we Latter-day Saints commemorate our exodus with the establishment of the world headquarters of the restored church in the top of the mountains. And even if you look at Temple Square, that top of the mountains verse is quoted at Temple Square. The church is not shy about saying this is the prophecy of Isaiah fulfilled. So at least in one sense. Scriptures available to ancient and modern Israel include timeless principles of the gospel. You may be familiar with the prophecy of Isaiah. Thou shalt be brought down and shalt speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as of one that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground. and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust. Could any words have been more descriptive of the Book of Mormon coming as it did out of the ground to whisper out of the dust to the people of our day? So again, we're seeing just some beautiful prophecy being fulfilled and a connection between ancient Israel and modern Israel. And I mean, this whole article is so good. Then he gets into the covenant of the gathering and the scattering. And he talks about just how this is all prophesied, how the Book of Mormon is the tool for the gathering. And that's where we are now. We're trying to gather Israel on both sides of the veil. So I'm just going to read the summary here. Early converts to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were pioneers of modern Israel. Regardless of the time or place in which saints may live, all faithful members of the church will receive their just rewards. All things are theirs, whether life or death, or things present or things to come, all are theirs, and they are Christ's, and Christ is God's. Ancient and modern Israel subscribed to an ageless message of the Old Testament. Know therefore that the Lord thy God keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him, and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. Upon our shoulders lies the responsibility to keep the faith through our own generation. This ball is now in our court. We of modern Israel are destined to become a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. We know that we are children of the covenant. We are remnants of the seed, now to be gathered and gleaned into God's eternal garners. As saints of modern Israel, we speak with one voice. We love our Heavenly Father. We love the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. We are his people. We have taken his holy name upon us. We know the Book of Mormon to be the Word of God and hold it as one with the Bible. We proclaim Joseph Smith as the prophet of the restoration, and we sustain our prophet. So, anyway, this is more what I think about when I'm thinking of these promises. And then I also wanted to show, I don't know if a lot of people know about this already or not, but something that I think ties into the eclipses marking these two covenant lands. And this idea of the Exodus are these points that this is a blog by David Snell. He did a really nice job of putting pictures here, so that's why I'm going to use his blog. So way to go, David. Thank you for this awesome blog post. And this is on thirdhour.org. And he points out like the really unique and bizarre similarities between Utah and Israel. And basically, if you turned Utah upside down, it looks like Israel. And so he's going to point this out. So both lands have a Dead Sea. We have the Dead Sea in Israel, and we have the Great Salt Lake. These are two super hyper saline lakes. And they don't have any like oceanic borders. So they're super salty, and they're both locked in, like completely landlocked. But they both have a small freshwater lake nearby, which if you compare the landscape, then you see that the one in Israel is the Sea of Galilee, and the one in Utah is Utah Lake. Now, a river flows from each freshwater lake into each saltwater lake, and they're both called the Jordan River. So we have a Jordan River that goes from the Sea of Galilee and feeds into the Dead Sea. And then we have the Utah Lake with its Jordan River that feeds into the Great Salt Lake. So once again, we see the Lord reminding us about two promised lands and two covenant peoples. And it's just so hard for me not to feel like these eclipses are also the Lord's way of reminding us in our generation of these promises, because these eclipses, they only repeat like just shy of every 400 years. So the fact that we have eclipses going over where Zion in the New Jerusalem is to be located, and Zion in the Old Jerusalem, marking kind of like where these exoduses occurred, this is just really interesting because, I mean, the saints literally had to flee their promised land that the Lord had given them, where they were told to build a temple, they had to flee from Missouri to Nauvoo, and then from Nauvoo to Salt Lake. And I mean, it's just so, the parallels are just so amazing. And then when you look at the parallels of the landscape, this is amazing. And going back to this Hebrew wedding motif, a woman's body is compared to land, because a woman's body brings forth fruit of the womb, and the land brings forth the fruit of the harvest. And the earth needs to be tilled and the soil nourished to be able to receive a seed and have it grow. And similarly, the womb, it's just the same. It's like it needs to be nourished. It needs to be a seed planted there to be able to grow. And then the placenta gives life to the seed, to the baby that's being grown in the woman's womb. And so we have like two ideas of bringing forth. We have bringing forth people, covenant people, children to the Lord, raising up seed to the Lord, raising up children to the Lord. And then we have this idea of covenant lands, which support and sustain the family. And then we have these lands being marked. These lands were promised lands given to the Lord's people. These lands are part of end time prophecy, that the first shall be last, the last shall be first, that this stick of Joseph will bring these two sticks together. The stick of Judah and Joseph will come together, and the lost tribes are included in this. So we have all of this like covenant theology blended with these two promised lands. And these eclipses are marking these two lands. So let me look at these parallels. These are amazing. This was actually first noted, I believe it was in a National Geographic article. And he's got it all broken down here in this little blog post. So another thing he notes is that both the Salt Lakes have a holy city nearby. So there's Jerusalem, and notice its position to the Dead Sea. And then there's Salt Lake, and notice its position to the Great Salt Lake. So we've got Salt Lake City and Jerusalem, and there's a church headquarters in Salt Lake City, and once upon a time there was a church headquarters in Jerusalem, and there will be again one day. Both of those cities were seen as promised lands. So the Israelites fled slavery in Egypt, and they wandered for 40 years and ended up in Jerusalem amongst other cities. And Latter-day Saints fled persecution in Missouri and Illinois and ended up in Salt Lake. And both of these are promised lands where church headquarters are established. So anyway, this is more what I think about when I see these eclipses, and what exactly it all means is hard to say, I think, in terms of making predictions about the second coming. But what I do think is easy to say is that the Lord remembers his covenant people. He remembers us. He remembers the promises to our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph Smith, and Brigham Young. And he remembers the sacrifice of all of his people, all the saints. And he wants us to remember this covenant so that we don't miss out on the blessings of this covenant. And anyway, that's kind of what it's making me think about. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I don't know, maybe look and pay a little more attention to the signs in the heavens, because we've got these really cool eclipses coming up in the near future. And one thing that I've kind of noticed is we're in this middle time right now, and on December 4th of 2025 next year, this will be the midpoint between the very first eclipse that started over America and the very last eclipse that will cross over the Red Sea in 2034. So the midpoint of that is December 4th, 2025, and I labeled this the eclipse chiasmus because it's right at the center. And I don't really know if something important will happen that day, but I just noted it because I feel like the Lord is gathering his people, and he wants us to remember this. And I just have been paying attention now to what the church is doing, where we're at with the gathering of scattered Israel. And, stopped and asked myself this question as I see the church making so much progress. I mean, they're going to be building a temple in Dubai. Who would have ever thought? And there's so much work being done with the Middle East right now. We have church leaders going there all the time. And there's just been a lot of growth in these areas that you just wouldn't imagine. And so if you follow church news, you'll probably see this. But this kind of makes me wonder, like, what is the Lord saying? Does he want us to remember the Exodus? Does he want us to remember these 2 Exoduses? Is he trying to help us remember our promise and also the promises we made to him, to help him gather his children? Because Ephraimites who live here in America, this is our responsibility, to take the gospel to all the world and to join these 2 sticks, not just the Book of Mormon and the Bible, but literally the people, the descendants of Joseph and the descendants of Judah, and bring them together and then gather in all the lost tribes. Like, that is the story of the house of Israel being restored in the last days. And we're obviously in the middle of this work. And so anyway, just this is all food for thought and something to think about and ponder on. But I definitely am thinking more about the Exodus of ancient Israel and the Exodus of modern Israel and the promises made to the fathers. And it's inspired me a lot to participate more with more urgency, I guess, in temple work and gathering scattered Israel. And I just want to bear my testimony that I know the church is true. I know that these promises will come to pass, that the Lord will gather his people and he will restore them to their promised lands of inheritance and also to all of the promised blessings of the priesthood. He will restore his people and he will bring forth good fruit for the Father. And I know that the church is true. I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet. I know that Brigham Young was a prophet. And he had a very hard mission. And he's not always, I think, recognized for the work that he did, maybe as much as Joseph Smith, but he did a huge work for the Lord. And I revere Joseph and Brigham for the work that they did to help get the church to where it is today, so that these promises that were made to the fathers can be fulfilled. And I see it happening. I see Israel being gathered. You know, we have all these little tribes and they're all coming together slowly, one by one. And at some point there'll be a huge joining and a huge gathering and rejoicing. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.